and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman Stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today.
Welcome to Our People's Podcast. This evening, we have Waylon as our host and Amanda. And tonight, we are joined by Starla. So we'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself, Starla.
Okay. Yes, so I am Starla. I was born in Linden, Alberta area there. That's kind of where I lived. I was the 8th child of 9 children in 11 years. So we were all stair-stepped about a year apart. And I always used to kind of joke about being the forgotten child. And someone finally told me one time that that's a real thing, Starla. The 8th child kind of is the forgotten one. So I was like, okay, well, I mean, literally and figuratively, then I was the forgotten child. I was a really sensitive kid. I absorbed energies around me but I had no frame of reference for it. So to me, it ended up framing for me who I was. So the negative energies became about me instead of about things that were going on around me that were negative, but I didn't know that they were. I thought it was just me. So I definitely started out with not necessarily the healthiest picture of who I was as a little human being. But kids are that way anyway. It was just interesting because the other day I went for a walk in the park. I needed to clear my head. I was working on a project and I come around the corner and this little girl, she just opened her arms out wide and she was running to me. She's like, hi. And she gave me the biggest hug. I've never seen her. I had no idea who she was. And I was waiting to see the recognition on her face when she hugged me that, oh yeah, this isn't someone I know. But it never came. It was like she knew me. And then later I was like, oh, that was just an energetic, her soul knew that my soul needed something to carry me through the rest of the day. So, but kids are that way, right? They don't have that same filter that we do. So, and that's also why I always kind of try to promote as much as possible this really good, healthy communication with kids, because if we don't give them a healthy frame of reference for things, then as children, we make our own, and often it's about us as not being a good person. I was also an incredibly fearful child, and honestly, that stayed with me pretty much my entire life. I used to joke that I was conceived in fear because it was just in the cells of my body. I was just like, I don't know, maybe I was just conceived in fear. But then I did it was a course on women and substance abuse. And this was like years and years later after I had already left the church. But that's kind of where I connected the dots, because we were talking there about how we always talk about it, that it's when there's a little baby growing, the fetus is growing, it's so much on the mom, right? Like we were talking about substance abuse, so how that affects them. But then she said, so many people don't realize that what the dad is going through, and even alcohol that he drinks, will definitely affect that fetus as well. And so I was doing the math one time and thinking about, as I was piecing some of the pieces together of my family, what I didn't know, but now in my adult years, I could understand what it was. I was like, oh my gosh, my family was going through some really, really, really hard times. And there was a lot of fear wrapped around it about the time I would have been conceived. So I'm like, no joke. It really was in the cells of my body. So, I mean, that was just a really fascinating thing for me to understand and piece together about who Starla really is and was at the time. Anyway. And so then as I was growing up, I became the eighth of 9 children. There was a lot of activity going on, and I learned really quickly to be a people pleaser. If I could please everybody, keep them happy, and do it quietly and unobtrusively, that was how I would feel safe. Now, I don't necessarily know how much I wasn't safe. I know there were times that I certainly felt like I wasn't, but emotionally, for me, it's always been the emotional. Emotionally, I didn't feel safe. And so just be quiet, don't cause any problems, and then make sure everyone around you is taken care of. And then somehow or other, that was supposed to feel safe. And in the end, it really has done a lot of damage to me emotionally, for sure. Let me see. I'm going to date myself here. I was a young child during the purge of the Holdeman Church, and I clearly remember that. Obviously, I had all these older brothers and sisters that were members, and so they were having these members meetings. Living in Linden at the time, it was a huge congregation, so there was a lot of activity. And I remember going to church with my mom when they brought food for feeding all the people there, and one of the doors of the Sunday school room where they were doing the interviews, somebody opened it, and I saw this lady she was just racked in sobs. She was just sobbing and sobbing. And I was just horrified at that. I was like, what the heck is going on here? But nobody really explained anything. I remember everybody had these little blue papers. Years ago, the missionaries would write letters back home on this blue kind of, it was airmail paper or something. It was much lighter. Yeah. And everybody got their little recommendation written on those papers. It's just such a clear memory in my mind of those little blue papers floating around here and there in the next place. And yeah, but I remember it wasn't a good feeling. None of it was, right? Like this, as kids would stay home from church and the members would go to church, but they would be there for like hours and hours, and we had no idea why nobody was coming home. And then there was all the emotion wrapped around it. Now, if you haven't, there is a YouTube video about that exact scenario where the excuse me, the people in Manitoba were brought together with an interviewer, and he taped an interview of these Holdeman people that have been excommunicated from the church because they didn't believe in the one true church. And that I watched that, and it was really eye-opening to me to see the pain, sorry, the pain that these people were going through because of this purge. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. They said that it was called The Way.
That's the video?
The video is called The Holdeman Purge of the 70s.
Okay. Thank you.
So check it out, because that will give an interesting, if you haven't seen it, it'll give an interesting picture of kind of the history of some of that went down. And then when I was, let's see, I think I was been about 9. Yeah, I would have been 9 or 10 years old when, I was still going to public school, and there was about 120 Holdeman kids that were going to the public school in the little town of Linden. And they decided to pull the 120 kids out of school and start their own church school. So obviously it was a big deal, because the public school was losing a third of their enrollment. And so they had to do something about it. And they also felt like there was a lot of other Mennonite communities there, or Mennonite Brethren, I think was the big one. And so there was a bit of a feud between the Holdeman Mennonites and the Mennonite Brethren people as well. But Linden Church ended up getting taken to court over that. And so I was going to school at the time, and I remember once the private school had started, and now we had to carpool, right? So my dad was bringing a bunch of us kids to school, and we came up to the 4-way stop in the little town of Linden, and there was a school bus in front of us. And all at once, the school bus just got thrown in reverse and just starts backing up. And, you know, it was all really scary because none of these things were necessarily explained to us in a really good way. It was more just, well, we're being persecuted and we may need to, you know, move to another province if we're going to have to deal with this. But they ended up winning the court case actually. And that was when the Minister of Education made the change. I don't know enough about law. I don't know if he was forced to do it or somehow in the process of this court case and the Holdeman Mennonites winning their court case, the laws were changed at that time that private schools would not be required to have certified teachers. And so I found that like almost personal in many ways, that I had been in the middle of all of this. And then that's kind of where our education changed, right? And it was a difficult time. And then it breaks my heart, the stories that I have heard in later years about what happened in that school. I wasn't necessarily targeted so much in the private school, the Holdeman school, but it was a little bit like, oh, how do I say it? The school itself was having a purge of beating and disciplining and punishing and creating massive rules to like make sure that this worldly influence was completely purged from the children. And honestly, some of the stories I have heard, the abuse was so bad. There should have been jail time for like it was very, very severe. Yeah, so that was really damaging to so many people. Yeah, it wasn't fun. But then when I was 11, my parents decided to move way northern Alberta, to a little community there called it's at Fort Vermilion. So I was kind of on top of everything else as I was growing up, labeled as, well, yeah, you came from Fort Vermilion, so you got by with things that the rest of us couldn't, because we were kind of isolated. We were about 6 hours from any other Mennonite or Holdeman community. So, well, we could kind of make our own rules, apparently, you know. So that was a little bit of a stigma, I guess, that I grew up with. But I looked at it as an adventure. It was a fun move. I really had some good friends through it all. Let's see. Then when I was 11 and a half, I was diagnosed with scoliosis, and normally with, I have a double curve. So with a curve that degree, normally they would have just done surgery. But the doctor said because I was so young, he wanted to try a body brace first to see if we could avoid surgery. So I wore a full body brace for 5 years. Yeah, so didn't help my self-esteem at all. I have to say though, that the kids that I was going to school with at the time, best kids ever. Not once did any one of them ever make me feel bad about it. It was adults and other people that were rude about it. But the shame that went with looking like a freak show, that was bad enough, but it was also because of the doctor himself. That was my first encounter with a person of authority being sexually inappropriate with me. And it started on my first visit and it continued at every visit. I had to go every 6 months. The town that I had to go to was a 6-hour drive from where we lived. So it was a big deal. Every 6 months we had to drive down there. And yeah, he was just incredibly inappropriate. But, and I want to say this gently and kindly. My mom, at least my mom, sometimes my dad, was always present as well. So they saw what was happening. But I think it was this conditioning that, well, doctors were authority, right? And whatever they said, you did. And I don't think they noticed exactly what he was doing. And I felt it, but because nobody was standing up for me, I didn't ever say anything about it until, it was a good 30 years later, after I had left the church. I was living in the Grand Prairie area at the time. And I went to get my nails done one day, and the esthetician was, I noticed she had the same last name. So just out of curiosity, I said something to her about it. And she goes, yeah, that's my grandpa. And she says, my children will never, ever see him, ever. And then I pieced together a lot of things about that and how insanely inappropriate he had been and that he was grooming me. Yeah. So that was, but to me, I guess I bring it up partly because it just shows that when you're not, when you're in a community where someone else calls all the rules for you, and there's not a healthy way or dialogue about sexual things and personal things, then even the parents sometimes don't know how to protect the children, right? Because my mom and dad, if they had understood what was really going on, there's no way on earth they would have allowed that. But yeah. And then the next thing that happened was I was engaged to a stranger who lived in the States, 1,400 miles away from where I lived. I had never been on my own. This was just prior to my 18th birthday. I had mostly just been domesticated, taking care of the home, and my mom had got some foster children, and I was kind of the mom to the foster kids in that time. And so then I had met this guy and spoken briefly with him a few times, but I did not in any way know him. And then we got engaged, and I moved down to the States, to Oregon. That was where I lived for 17 years. That was where I had my family. I don't know. I considered myself reasonably mature at that age and capable of a lot of things, but I was 100% not emotionally equipped to deal with that massive of a change. And so I do say that was the single most traumatic event of my life, which I think is really sad because for both of us, for the man I married and for me, it was a not a healthy way to start a relationship for sure. And in the 3 months that we were engaged, I lost a good 30 pounds because I was so stressed. And then once all the stress was over and we had moved, we got all the border crossing issues taken care of, because that I had to do as well, and settled down a little bit. We went to the coast for a weekend, and we were at Ripley's, believe it or not. And in one of the rooms we walked into, it was telling you how much you would weigh if you were on the moon. And so I was doing the math, and I'm like, oh, so in 2 weeks' time, I gained 40 pounds. Yeah. So that was the kind of trauma. My body I wasn't aware of it at all. I had no clue this was happening to me. I was so out of it. But I realized then that I had been going to the fridge, opening the fridge and looking in for something. And I had no idea how I had got there or how long I had been there. So food became my friend. Yeah. And I had also, as a child, I had definitely used food as a friend too. When I was I remember being skinny till I was about 6. And then suddenly I became a very obese child. And so again, too, when I do the math, I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, okay, now that I know some of the things that happened, I was feeling all that energy. So I was eating to protect myself and cover up all of this thing that I had no idea what was going on, right? Yeah, so I was massively lonely and dealing with culture shock when I moved to Oregon there. So I turned inward. I became very, very quiet, and I felt like I was always exposed. Like when I would go to church, I would never sit on the middle aisle. I would always walk around the side and sit as close to the wall as I possibly could, as far away from the men as I possibly could. I just felt like everybody was watching me. I have no idea if they were. It was just the feeling of being so out of my comfort zone. I had no idea what to do with myself. Um, and I had been so looking forward to making friends with the girls my age, but those girls weren't married yet. And I didn't realize that in that congregation, at least, there was quite a divide between the married and the single. And so I found the girls to be, I guess I experienced that they were kind of mean girls. It felt like I was constantly being talked about and judged, and then it would get back to me, right? I guess that's how I knew what was going on. With the exception of one girl, she was incredible and amazing. But what happened was I ended up becoming friends with these girls' moms. So in a way, I've always felt like I'm older than what I was, because I was dealing with women that were old enough to be my mom, but they were the ones that kind of took me under their wing, I guess, and cared for me. I don't know. It was just so confusing to me too, because I just couldn't be good enough while I was living there. I was Canadian, so I was considered automatically a worldly person compared to the more conservative Americans. And they were proud of that conservative mindset that they had, and told me that they were. So I was very confused, because I didn't even know how to step out of the house and dress properly, because things that I thought were just the way you dressed were considered sin. So I was immediately introduced to a lot of confusing ideas about what was okay and what wasn't. And over time, I became really troubled about the fact that the relationship with God felt more like it was about performance. It wasn't about, do I have a relationship? It was about, do I wear the right shoes with the right dress? Do I wear black hose to Sunday services? Do I have a certain length of dress? And it was just incredibly confusing, because I could never do it right. I remember at one point being so discouraged, I actually got rid of my entire wardrobe and I sewed a new one. And I made sure I got just ordinary prints, cotton fabric, tiny flowers. I just made them as conservative as possible. And the first time I went to church with one of those new dresses, the minister's wife came and told me that she had a concern about my dresses. And I was like, really? Like what? Because I said, I've just made all new clothes so that I didn't have this happen again. And she said, well, your collar is too big. And I'm like, oh, I was beaten. Like I didn't know what to do. And I finally told her, I said, well, I come from a family of very creative women. My grandma, they were completely dirt poor. So she would go to the thrift shop and buy garbage bags full of clothes that were like 25 cents a bag. And then she would remake those clothes into really nice clothes for her kids. And my mom had told me that at one point she had actually got reproved, or, I don't know what other word you would use. Some people don't know what the word reproved is, but if you're Mennonite, you know what it is. For dressing her kids way above their means, when in reality she had put forth a tremendous amount of work and effort for a little bit of nothing so that her kids had clothes. And so I was sharing that with the minister's wife, and she goes, well, that might be, but she said, we can't all just be what we want to be. The closer we are to God, the more alike we're going to be. And I was questioning that, because I'm like, well, okay, if we're created by God and we're created these wonderful people and we have all these different personalities, then aren't we honoring God by being who we are instead of being fit into this box? It was just massively confusing to me. But I ended up with just a horrific depression through all of it as well. When I had my third child, I remember about 6 weeks in, when I was pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant with my third child, I physically felt something shift inside. And this massive depression just kind of took over me. Like it was almost day and night. And I had absolutely no clue what to do with it. It was horrible, but because I was pregnant, the doctor was like, well, just wait till you have the baby. It'll be fine. And it didn't let up, and it didn't let up. I actually had a really deep depression for 16 solid years. And that is one of the most incredibly painful things that I have faced as a mother, because my children were children. My oldest would have been about 6 when that happened. So he had a frame of reference of who mom was before and who mom was now. My middle son has talked about how painful that was and how hurtful it was, not understanding what was going on, even though we talked about it, or I tried to explain to them what was going on and that it was not their fault at all. They were still incredibly affected by it. Yeah, so he remembers a little bit more of it, but the youngest one, that was till he was 16 or 17. That was all he knew, was a mom that was depressed. And that is definitely a form of trauma on children, because the person that they needed the most I was unavailable in so many ways. Yeah. Yeah. And then during that time too, then that's kind of where some of that pressure from the leaders picked up as well. That I was constantly in trouble with the way I dressed, the way I combed my hair. And it didn't matter that I was dealing with the postpartum issue either. When my mother-in-law had told me to let them know, tell the minister straight up, that's what you're doing. And I'm like, that's just so embarrassing. I didn't want to do that. But I did. And they're like, well, that might be, but it's really just that you're not godly. And I was like, I mean, I don't know how much more godly to get. I don't know what else to do. It was just the worst. And then this was over years that this kept kind of going on. And then when the kids were in school, actually my oldest was probably in 7th or 8th grade already. There were some problems with the teacher, one of them for sure, more than one actually. One of the teachers was actually my husband at the time, his aunt, and she was dealing with her own stuff for sure. But the children were definitely being affected by it as well. And she openly admitted to us that she didn't care for our son. Like, that wasn't even a secret. So she was taking out her frustration on him as well. And yeah, it was not a fun time, because there was no out for us as parents in that case. I would tell my son, look, I know what's happening in school isn't okay. Like, you're not being treated right. The other kids aren't being treated right. And that's not okay. But can you, somewhere inside of you, find a way to respect the position? If you can't respect the teacher, can you respect the position of authority? And then we were going through these revival times as well. And the ministers, of course, are questioning us about how we're handling the situation. And I said, well, we're doing what we can. I explained what I had told my son. And he said, no, you cannot tell your children that. That's not respecting the teacher. And so there was just no out. I just felt like there was no out. I wanted to pull my kids out of school and homeschool them, but I didn't even consider it, because that would have meant being expelled. And of course, the terror of being expelled was so huge for me at the time. So that's another one of the things that I struggle with as a mom, forgiving myself for not making my children more important than the church. That's just really, really hard. But I felt like I didn't know what else to do. Yeah. And so around that time, there was I guess because of some of the problems in school, this is what I was told by one of the other parents that was also having trouble, are getting in trouble from the leaders, if you will, was that there were problems in school with the teacher and the school board, but instead of facing the problem full on from the leadership, they decided to put pressure on the parents that had spoken up against the situation. So I think they called in extra ministers from other congregations, and then they started bringing us in for visits, private visits. There's some of the details are gone with that, but I remember at one point they had asked if I was offended, and I was like, well, no, because if you're going to deal with the kids and you tell the kids you're going to deal with them. I guess at this point they had told my son that if he didn't straighten up, then they were going to kick him out of school. And I said, you've already told him that's what you're going to do. So if you don't stick true to your word, then how is he going to believe you? Then you're lying to him. It wasn't that I wanted him kicked out of school, but I wanted this situation to be like, don't lie to my son. That was kind of what I was saying. And it was interesting because the pressure to be better parents kind of kicked up a notch once I did that. It was like they had preconceived what we were going to do as parents, and then it didn't matter what we said. It was what they wanted it to be, and then we got into more trouble. It was very ongoing that way. So we got called in, and there was probably about 10 ministers sitting around there, and, well, Starla, are you offended? And I was like, no, I don't feel like I am. To me, we were just making the best of a bad situation. And so the minister whips out his little electronic dictionary, and he reads the definition of offended. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, if you want to take it literal, word for word, then yeah, I was offended. I was offended at treating my son the way you were treating him. And then they asked if I had peace with God. And I was like, yes, I feel like I do. And they looked at me and they were like, no, you don't. So they said this was getting serious and they would need me to repent, or they were going to bring me in front of the church as a problem. And my husband at the time was included in some of this as well, but he has such a different personality. He played the game a little bit better, if you want to call it that. And so he kind of got off a little bit easier than I did. Anyway, so 6 weeks down the road, then we got called back in for another visit with another of these 10 ministers or so. Oh, prior to that, this was the other thing that really shocked me, was when they said I didn't have peace, but my husband at the time, he was told that he was good to go. So then when we all left, the ministers' wives, and they were almost every one of them was either his cousin, his auntie, or some relative of his, like quite a close relative. So we're getting ready to leave, and they all come and they give him a big hug. And I just thought this was showing love. So I was just standing there waiting, as soon as they had all done their thing, that I was going to get a hug too. And they literally turned away and said, no, because I didn't have peace. I was not worthy of love, I guess. That was not something I had ever expected to experience in a setting like that. So we got called back in 6 weeks later, and then they asked again, did I have peace? And I said, you know what? I honestly do not know, because I really thought I did, and you told me I didn't. So I don't know. And I was like, I had no idea what was going to happen. I literally did not know. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, you do. You're good. So that was incredibly confusing to me too. As a very sensitive person, none of this made sense. If we're going to talk about love, then let's be love. Let's show love. Let's not, I had no idea what to make of it. Yeah. So that was really difficult. And then somewhere in all of that, we sold our property and moved to Canada. I wanted my boys to live in Canada because they were already Canadian citizen as well. They had dual. And I thought it would be really great if we could live there before they were 18, and so that they could kind of have a feel of both countries, and then they could decide. I didn't want that clear definition between, oh, you're Canadian or oh, you're American, like what I had experienced when I moved to the States. I wanted them to feel at home in both places, I guess. Anyway, it turned out that we did. The leadership there in Oregon wanted us to stay until everybody was, good enough, I guess, so that they could go to have their communion service that they have. And we stayed longer because of that, but I don't remember if it ever got to that point or if we finally just had to leave and move. But we knew that if we didn't cooperate to a point, then whatever we were dealing with there was going to be sent to the community in Canada where we were going to be living, and we really didn't want that headache following us. Oh, anyway, so we lived in one of the congregations close to Grand Prairie there. There's about 4 of them, I think. It was a newer one, a small one. And we kind of settled in there. It was a really difficult adjustment for all of us. My ex, or my husband at the time, was having his own struggle, which was very fascinating and kind of sad for me to watch, because I was the one who had left my family and everything I knew. And I was the one who was lonely. And at one point he had said, I don't know what that would be like. I don't think I'd ever miss my family. And so now here we are, living in a country that's very foreign to him in so many ways. And he was going through quite a struggle. And then my 2 youngest were still in school. And that was a big adjustment for them as well. And being the mom and the sensitive person I was taking all that weight on. And the depression just got really, really bad. It was very dark. Every day I would get the boys off to school and I would climb in my car and I would drive to Grand Prairie one way, grab me a coffee and drive home a different way. And I would just feast my eyes on nature, because it was the only thing that kept me going. It was really, really rough. Yeah. So then I found out that there was a child that had been molested by a church member, and they were covering it up. I never did go to the members' meeting where they brought it up, but I found out that they had brought it up as just someone who was dealing with lasciviousness. And then 2 weeks later, they had another members' meeting where they wanted to reinstate his membership. And that one I didn't go to either, because I still didn't know anything about what was going on. It was in that meeting where one of the fathers, thank goodness, had the wherewithal to question. And he said, well, from things I've been hearing, people go to jail for what this man did. Are you sure we want to reinstate him? And so the leaders that were hiding it were that close to getting by with hiding it. And then when that happened, it became this massive fiasco that actually lasted, I'm going to say, a good year, where, I don't even know where to begin. It was just so sad, because the perpetrator was remorseful for having been found out. And the victim's family was very, very angry, as they should be. But the community, not being prepared for this kind of thing, rejected the victim's family, the victim and the victim's family, and kind of went, supported the perpetrator, because there wasn't enough emotional intelligence, I guess, or emotional maturity to understand that anger is a good thing. You can support the people that are angry. And when someone has done something wrong, you cannot support that wrong. Not that they were necessarily supporting it. It was just, they didn't know what to do. I don't want to make excuses for it. I just have a heart for it. And this is why it's so important to talk about these things, so that we can grow and understand better how to handle situations like this, because it's the same as with grief. When someone has lost a loved one, we feel like we need to say something instead of just being there with our presence. Well, this was a tremendous amount of grief for this family. And they weren't getting that presence that they needed, just someone to hold space for them while they hurt, while their hearts bled. And after I found out about it, I didn't know what to do. And finally, one day, I just went to the store. I bought a single red rose. I wrote a little note on there. No one should ever have to go through what you're going through, and I am so sorry. And I knocked on her door and gave it to her, and just said, you know what, I'm thinking about you. And I left. And then I got a phone call. And then that's when I started hearing the story of what had actually been going on and what was going on. And yeah, it was one of the most painful times that I had ever been in, because I just had thought that this church that I belonged to and embraced the beliefs, and I had been Sunday school teacher to a girls' class, and I remember, just not too much before that, I remember telling them deep from my heart, if you don't believe in this one true church doctrine, there's absolutely no reason for us to ever be part of this church. And I wasn't even thinking of it in a, like, we should just go. I was thinking, this is what's holding us together. And so now here I was, this belief being completely shattered at my feet and having no idea how to handle it and what to do. At the time, I was working at a daycare in the little town that we were living in. And I finally, out of desperation, I asked the executive director there if they knew of anyone that I could talk to, because told a little bit about the situation. And she said, yes, as a matter of fact, the mothers of one of the little kids here works at the sexual assault center. I'll put you in touch with her. And the love and care that they offered and went out of their way from that sexual assault center was incredible. They were coming to our town, and I don't know how, there's a lot of this that isn't, it's a foggy memory, but they were having therapy, like even group therapy sessions with the women. Nobody had to pay a cent. This was all complimentary, because they understood, because they had dealt with so much sexual abuse within Mennonite communities. They already knew, I didn't know this then, quite a bit later, I found out they already knew who some of these perpetrators were. There just wasn't enough evidence to actually charge them, because there was more than one. And so they were trying to help us get to this place of where we weren't all so broken. And the interesting thing, and this, sometimes I'm ashamed when I think about this, but it is what it is. This therapist had a group of us women, about 5 or 6 of us, I think, maybe, not all from that congregation. There was about, a few from others that were coming in, but we did this session of what she does when she goes into schools and teaches kids about an okay touch and a not okay touch. And do you know that sitting there at 40 years or 41 years old was the first time it dawned on me that I had a right to say no. It was so deeply ingrained in me that, and that makes perfect victims. When children, and now I was an adult, didn't even understand that I had permission to have boundaries. So that was really eye-opening to me. I don't know where I was going with that. Wow. Anyway, she also, the executive director also of the sexual assault center, told me that I could take any one of their courses for free. And these were like $100, $200 courses. But she says, if you learn those and take them back to your community, we'd be more than happy. Now, I was so emotionally broken, I couldn't possibly have managed all of those courses. I did take a few, but she also very generously offered to come and do a course with the community on understanding how an offender acts, and learning to recognize some of the things that are common in predators. And then she also showed have you ever heard of Dombrowski's levels of emotional health? That was really fascinating. I'll have to send you a picture of that as well. Talking about the different levels of health, and how when you get to about level 3 is where you start really feeling your own emotions, and understanding that it's okay. And that was just so eye-opening to me. She kept saying healthy people feel, but we weren't encouraged to feel anything. I mean, we were supposed to be happy or guilty. So now here was all this anger and fear and sadness, and there was no outlet for it. And then to be told that that's actually healthy to feel that way, that was such an amazing thing for me. Yeah. But eventually the ministers were getting very unhappy with us. Well, me, I guess. I had support from my husband as well. So we started getting in trouble, I guess, if you will. I remember one time they called us in for a visit, and I wish now that I had kept the Bible verses that they read as an introduction to this meeting that we were having. I have no idea what it was. I just remember sitting there, and I finally looked at the minister and I said, so you've been coming here, like these were visiting ministers that were coming to support the situation and help out. I said, you've been coming here for a year already. You know good and well what the problem is here and who the problem is. And you're not doing anything about it. So I'm sorry, but you are now part of the problem. I don't know where I got the strength to say that, but it didn't make sense to me, because they were protecting another perpetrator. And it was just, there was just so much power and control going on. Yeah, I don't know. So I just
what
kept
was your response?
Oh, it was more of in that particular case, there wasn't a response. There was nothing for him to say, right? Because if he said yeah, and yeah, he would be admitting. I know one other time we had, and I don't know if it was with this same minister or not, there was a couple of us couples that had gotten together to just kind of share, kind of like, well, surely there's another way we can handle this. And the one minister was sitting in the corner just listening, and then they just kiboshed everything we said. And I don't remember now the conversation that we had, but essentially they just annulled everything we had discussed. And then when he was getting ready to leave, I said, I just have to say that was really hurtful. It didn't feel like we were actually listened to or validated. And he said, validated? What's that? What does that mean? And I said, well, it means that you heard us and acknowledge it. I said, it doesn't mean you agree, but that you would acknowledge, and then we could kind of maybe move towards a solution. And he said, well, you have to understand, Starla, that as ministers, we are not validated either. It's just, we would like to be validated too. And I'm like, you're a leader. You've chosen this position. Like, grow up. I don't know. It was just, I can laugh about it now. It wasn't funny. It was just so painful. But I decided that they would never, I wasn't going to leave the church, because if you leave, well, then you're just choosing to go to hell. And so I was finding like, you know what, they're going to have to do this to me. There's no way I'm leaving. And then we were talking with some friends that were not part of the church. And he looked at me and he said, Starla, you need to leave on your own terms. And I just felt this weight to leave, because you're right. If I am responsible for my own choices in life and I want to live a healthy life, well, then I will choose to walk away, because I know I can no longer, I just can't be part of this. And so I just quit coming to church. I quit. I didn't respond to any of the invitations to have visits with the ministers, or I was just done. There was no need for any more. And it was just a really amazing feeling.
It feels great to be in control and not to be a victim. And the thing is that any situation we can take control back and stop being a victim and allowing things to happen to us and realize that we have a choice. And there's no better feeling in the world than taking back your power.
Yeah.
It takes a person who's already grown a lot, though, to understand that you have that power.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most people, I mean, you were a pretty free spirit. So when you did that, I think you felt that. But I think for some of the other people, it's terrifying. If you don't feel like you have that power, you just feel like you're going up against the world.
Okay, well, give me a call, anybody that needs to feel that power, and I'll be more than happy to help you see how you can stop being the victim and take your power back.
Yeah. And I agree, Waylon. We had, while we were still members, I was working, another one of the places that I had worked at was the Curves Gym for Women. I was one of the circuit coaches there as a Mennonite. One night there was a girl in there all alone, and she told me about a personal growth seminar that she had attended in Calgary, the city of Calgary. And it was, you went for 5 solid days. And then a month later you would go for a weekend, and a month later you went for another weekend. And I was completely fascinated by the story that she told me about how she had healed so much of her pain. And so I looked into it. And then as members still of the church, we secretly went to that personal growth seminar. And there were a lot of things about it that now looking back, I wouldn't right away recommend it to people. In fact, I don't even know if they're running anymore, but that was life-changing because it was a very experiential 5 days of really facing kind of the darkness of who you are. And I remember one time we broke up there was about 200 of us in this course, and we broke up into small groups. And then we all took turns where we'd stand in the middle, and then they would tell us, I experience you as, and then they would tell us how they experienced us. And you just had to stand there and take it. Right. And some of the things that they told me was devastating. Like one of them said, I experience you as a very angry person. And I'm like, I just started crying because I don't even know what anger is. I never allowed myself to feel anger because I was so terrified of the consequences. I had seen enough growing up. I never wanted to be that way. But I remember we all went and sat back down, and then all at once it clicked. I can choose if I want to believe what that person told me or not. And I had such a relief. And at exactly that same time, the director of this course gets up and she tells people, you can choose. Nobody has to follow what they were told. And I was like, yeah, that was the whole point of the exercise. It was experiential, right? And I felt so empowered then. And it was after that I was able to stand up for myself and just know that I could leave, and I didn't even have to worry about hell. Another one of the things that I went through during that time was we went through some guided meditations where we walked down a path, and every one of these, I had never done guided meditations before, but I think we had 3 of them in that course of 5 days. And it was so fun for me because every one of them, I was always a step ahead of the narrator. She would say, okay, walk down this path. And then I would see something. And then she'd say, and now you'll see this. And it was exactly what I was seeing in my mind. So it was really working. I've never had that experience since, but it was really cool to experience it there. So we're walking down this path, and then they say, And now your dad is coming towards you, but he's a 6-year-old boy. What are you feeling? What is your dad telling you? And we did that with both of our parents. And wow, was that powerful. Because I finally saw my dad for the child he had been and the child he had never been able to heal, and why I had so much struggle with my dad. And they were like, okay, so now your dad's turning around and he's handing you a flower. And the look in his face, and I'm like, I can't hold anything against him anymore. I know everything he did was coming from his own brokenness. And it was kind of the same experience with my mom. I just hadn't been hurt in the same way, I guess, with my mom as I had been with my dad. But coming out of that, I was able to deal with my parents in vastly different ways. I came from such a place of compassion. And if I struggled with it, all I had to do was go back to that trail where I met them as children. And then that was how I could show up for them. It was pretty powerful.
I bet it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. So then, we walked away from the church, but then the reality hit of, the people that said, well, it doesn't matter what they try doing to you, we're going to have your back. And obviously they weren't able to. So we lost a lot of support. So definitely relied a lot on these amazing therapists that I was getting therapy for free, which was really nice. And the thing that I found the most frustrating about going to therapy, I've had quite a number of therapists, was the amount of time that I had to spend explaining the culture. I was so broken, I needed help. But in order for them to help me, they had to understand the culture, because I would use language that they weren't necessarily familiar with. And I didn't realize how groups will have their own language. So now here I am having to translate something that I didn't know needed to be translated. So that was really, really frustrating for me. But eventually I got to the point too where talk therapy wasn't doing it. I was so frustrated. I felt like I was just stuck again. And in the Grand Prairie area, there was a lot of, it was kind of this interesting group of energy workers and spiritual teachers and that kind of thing that I was slowly getting introduced to. Obviously was terrified about it because it was something that we were told was evil, right? And so I remember having this conversation with God, whoever God was at that point. I didn't know. I knew that I was having to reframe God because all I knew was the Holdeman God, which wasn't something I wanted anything to do with. And so I told this power, now I call it the oversoul or energy source or whatever. But I was like, you know what? Here I am. If I'm here to live a life that honors the Creator, then I'm going to just do it, whatever it is. I am desperate. I need help. So if I'm going down a path that's going to lead me wrong, you're the one who has to change it. You're going to have to stop me because I'm doing this. And so I went into these different sessions and exploration of energy and different modalities of healing with a certain level of calmness, because I knew I had nothing else to do but trust some higher power to protect me, because I had been told it was evil, but I knew I needed something. And it was really interesting because my dad had to go to the hospital for something. So they had traveled from Fort Vermilion up to Grand Prairie, and my sisters were coming. And this was the first time that we had been together since I had, let my hair down and started wearing pants and, all that. And I was really, really nervous. I was already so broken from everything we had been through, but I was also terrified of what they were going to do now. Like, was I going to have to defend my position, or were they going to just love me because I was Starla. I was who I was. She just needs love. I had no idea. And I was also struggling with this thing about not wearing the head covering. I hated it. I hated the head covering. I got rid of it, no problem. But I had had a minister tell me, I'm like, tell me what this means in the Bible, that the verses that you use about why women have to have their head covered. And it says something about because of the angels. Like I said, I get it. We're supposed to wear this head covering to be show that we're submissive to God and to our husbands. But what is this phrase, because of the angels? And he said, well, it was so the angels would know who to protect. So bizarre to me now, but I'm like, okay, so now here I am in the big bad world without a head covering. So how the heck is any angel going to know how to protect me? And it was so interesting. I was going to meet my sisters in Starbucks first before we went to the hospital to be with my parents. And I'm sitting there. I got there ahead of time because I needed to prepare myself. And the door opens and there was a glass entry kind of before you got right into the restaurant part of the Starbucks there. And I'm on the side and he's walking through the glass area. He turns and looks at me with the biggest smile on his face. And it was an instant, like half split second reaction. I started getting up out of my chair because it was like, he's here to come see me. It was like this smile of recognition. And then I sat back down. I'm like, oh no, he's just the angel.
Yes.
I didn't have my head covering on, but the angel knew who to protect. That smile meant something to me. And then I didn't think much about it. We went to the hospital, supported my parents through whatever they were going through. And I had to park my car about 4 blocks away from the hospital and walk. And so it was late afternoon. I had to go back to my car and I'm walking down. It wasn't necessarily the best part of town either. And then also I become aware of this guy that's walking in front of me, walking the same way that I am. But I'm like, okay, I've been taught all my life that women alone are not safe. You're just a target and, you need to be careful. So I slowed down to put more distance between him and I. And I keep my eye on him and he gets to the corner and he stops and he literally turns around and he gives me the most beautiful smile and then turned around, walked around the corner. So twice in one day, I didn't have my head covering on, but there was somebody out there that was taking care of me. Anyway, then I went to see this one energy healer who she would read kind of my energy. I had no idea what was going on, how it was working. It was just, I'm here, I need help. And all once she looks at me and she goes, you've had a head injury, haven't you? And I was like, no. She goes, you have. Like, I'm actually feeling pain in the back of my head. I'm like, but I haven't. I said, the only thing that ever happened to me was years ago. I had a great big corner jacuzzi in the master bathroom and I was cleaning it. I had sprayed it and stupid me, I step into the tub because I couldn't reach the far corner. And I wiped out and I hit the back of my head on the edge of the tub. But I had my head covering on and my waist length hair had been all tied up in a bun. So I had that protection, but I hit hard enough that it popped everything open. Like my clips and everything came undone. And she looked at me and she goes, oh, so it's not a head injury. This has something to do with your head covering. She says, what did you do with it? And I said, I burnt it. I mean, what else? I didn't want it I didn't want it around. I burnt it. And she goes, okay, well, she said, what if we just get rid of it with love? Let's just do a little thing. She said, hold your hands out and imagine you holding the head covering in your hand and close your eyes. I was like, okay. And then she said something. I have no idea what she said. But she said, okay, now let's just release it with love. And I opened my eyes and the weirdest thing happened. And okay, it was like, when you were a kid, did you ever watch any of those movies like Tinkerbell where she hits with her little wand and it makes that little fairy dust and the sound, the bell sound that goes with it?
Yes.
I opened my eyes and I heard Tinkerbell's little wand, and that head covering turned into blue butterflies and flew away. And
Beautiful.
okay, so what's that?
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And the project, I guess, that I've always worked with when it comes to like advocating for survivors of abuse or any of that, I've always called it the Butterfly Project, and it has a blue butterfly. It's just kind of my signature thing. But so I just, to me, those were so amazing experiences for me personally. And even if none of it was real, like it's esoteric, whatever, maybe none of this happened. It didn't matter to me if it was real or not. What mattered was it helped me have a shift in my perspective. And that was what was so important to me. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
oh gosh, I don't know. If you guys have questions, I know I could talk a little bit more about some of the abuse cases that I've been involved in, but otherwise, yeah, I don't know. I guess I could say a little bit about eventually oh yeah, my project, the Butterfly Project. What happened was, as the sexual assault center, the executive director and the therapist were working with me, they were asking all these questions, and they were finally able to piece together a bit better picture of these closed communities that they had to work in, because they always want to go with respect, but they had no understanding or background of it. And so she asked one day if I would be willing to come and talk to her therapist and just kind of talk about the culture. And well, of course I said yes, but I had no idea what I was going to talk about or how. And my husband at the time, he came with me for that first one. And I remember on our drive into town, I told him, like, I feel like it's not possible for me to give them a very good picture, because this is me and my experience. I can tell them that, but it's like, that story of the 7 blind men that were supposed to describe an elephant, right? And they all described it completely different because they only had their own perspective. And then he told me, he says, well, then just tell your perspective. That's all you need to do. And that was really helpful, because then we went in there and I did what I'm doing here. I just talked and talked and talked. And I was not at all prepared for the response coming from all of these people, how grateful they were. And they wanted me to come back again. I thought everybody knew about these closed cultures and, how they operated. I didn't realize that they just didn't know. And then that kind of started that cascade effect of victim services started asking me, child family services, different school liaisons, when they had their PD days, then I would be invited to give talks. And then the biggest one I ever did was in 2017, they had a national, the Alberta Police Force, I believe it was, every year or every other year does a national conference in Banff, and they asked if I would be one of the keynote speakers there. There was about 1,000 people attending the conference, and then we would break up into breakup sessions. So I had the room that they gave me, I think it had, for fire safety wise, I think they had a limit of 120 or 130 people. That was the biggest crowd that I ever spoke to, but it was really fun, because I remember as I'm talking about my experiences, and I've had a lot of other people share their experiences with me. And then when I've asked, can I share that when I do these presentations, they're like, yes, that story needs to be shared, but I know I can't do it. So will you share it for me? So that was really nice, because then I had not just the technical outline of things, but I had the anecdotal evidence to go with it. And I have always wanted to do these presentations in a way that didn't just zero in on a certain type of Mennonite group. I wanted it to be more about closed cultures. So it could be other cultures as well. And every time someone would talk to me, oh, this reminds me of this situation I'm dealing with, and it had nothing to do with Mennonite, then I knew that I had done the presentation right, because we're human. That's what it is. We're human, and we all feel. and we all understand trauma. And so I knew I had been able to share the right information to help in many different ways. And my desire was always that when I would go in with these presentations, it would be to give them an understanding of a culture so that when they were called in during the crises, that they would be able to show up with confidence and respect for the culture. And so it was really fun. I knew that emotionally I wasn't strong enough to work so much with the survivors of abuse, but to be able to educate people about a culture so that they could go in and do it was just, it just felt like such an amazing thing to be able to do.
I believe that.
Yeah, it was good.
You know, we all want to do our little part, but that is a great part, and that's a big part, and that it reached so many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And I wasn't, necessarily prepared for it, but like I've always said, a wound needs a witness. And it was the most unique gift that I was given as I went in to do these presentations. I had the witness for my own wound. And each time I did it, I grew. So the victim service unit had asked me to do a presentation, and then 6 months later I was asked again, and I didn't think anything of it. I just, yeah, for sure, I went. And then we usually did round table, so I would do my presentation, and then the last half of it would usually be questions and answers, which was amazing because that's how I do best with anyway, is conversation. And the one when we were into the question and answer piece, then one of them said, Starla, you were here just 6 months ago doing the same presentation, and the growth in you is absolutely phenomenal. And I didn't know that it was that same group, but that was such good feedback. If I hadn't had that kind of encouragement, I don't know where I would be. And even one of the RCMP officers that I've worked with quite a bit, because he's been stationed in an area where there's a lot of Mennonites. He told me too, he's like, what have I known you now? 5 years? He says, you are a completely different person than when I first met you. I'm like, keep talking. I need to hear this. It's good.
Yeah, that's fun to hear things like that.
Yeah.
And to see how far we've grown. Waylon's had a moment or two like that. He's still trying to get used to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It takes a bit to just, believe it and accept it, because we know what we struggle with. And even now, like the conditioning goes really deep, right? Like I was 42 when I left. I've always kind of been a bit jealous, I guess, of the people that saw what they saw. Like even my son, at 10 or 11 years old, he's like, yeah, Mom, he says, I can't ever be part of this. I don't know how they had that awareness. I just know that when I had that little experience with the head covering turning into blue butterflies, I went home and I was so angry, because I'm like, why? I'm 42. Why did I not see and understand these things differently before? And then I realized there is no way that I could be helping and teaching and educating if I hadn't have been completely immersed in that culture. And so I was like, okay, well then I have to talk. Like it's why I went through what I did. And my desire was that the culture, the people would not be ostracized because of what I was saying. I wanted them to recognize that this was a human system, an institution that was creating, when you don't necessarily know who's in charge of a system, the system itself takes on a life form of its own. And I wanted them, I always share, share this in my presentations, that it is not the people I'm talking about. It is the system. And it is difficult to change a system, but if you don't have a frame of reference for it, then how do you change? How do you grow? And so that was what was so important to me, was understanding, having a frame of reference, and then kind of connecting the dots for these people who were helping but didn't know what the culture was about.
Yes, because the people, the individuals, the people, they are wonderful.
Mhm.
It's the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And even for me, healing from that, I didn't have to be angry and hate the people and the hurt. It was, I recognized that we were all a product of the system. So it was very helpful.
Yes, that is, because that's a little bit of a mind twist, when you're trying to put that in order about, because they're wonderful. I mean, I have great friends still that are Holdemans, but it's the system.
Mhm.
So just understanding that and realizing, that it's okay to love the people.
Yeah.
And to free yourself from that system.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when I've talked about the divorce that I went through as well, I've had different people tell me, well, Starla, your husband was a product of the system as well. And at first when I was angry about, like, when I finally realized what I had lived with and I was angry about it, it was almost hurtful to hear him to be reminded of that, because I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be he hurt me. But I knew it wasn't, because I was emotionally immature. I was having depression. I was creating all these other situations that were also making it incredibly difficult for him. But then over time, I've come to just accept that, you know what, we were both emotionally very unhealthy. We were doing the best we could. And as we grew differently, and we just weren't good for each other. And it wasn't that he was this monster or anything like that. It was that we were unhealthy people that needed to, the lessons we had learned from each other were learned, and now we needed to go our separate way.
Yep, that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. We could talk forever. We all know that, but if you have any questions or anything, I don't know.
I did have not, it's just purely interest, my interest. You worked at that fitness. Did you wear a covering and a dress there?
I did. When I would do my workout, I would change into workout clothes and then go back into a dress and a head covering. And then towards the last while that I was there, yeah, I just didn't bother changing back into my dress. I just, it's so weird, because that was something I was never going to do, was wear a head covering, but clothes that looked like the rest of the people. To me, they're not mutually inclusive. So, but I did. I finally just hung out in my workout clothes, and yeah, I always wore a head covering.
One of the other things you said that caught my attention was you said you were skinny till you were 6. And I was almost pretty much exactly like that. I found records where I was lighter than my friends in my first grade physical or whatever. They come out and weigh everybody every year or whatever. And from that point on, I was far heavier. And I've always wondered about that. Do you have any, I don't know. I just wondered why it happened.
I mean, I come from a family of, well, we've got Dutch background, right? The heavy bottomed women. That's maybe German as well, but yes, I come from a family of very large, heavy boned people. So I didn't think that much about it, but I have a very vague memory of being actually skinny. And so then I started piecing together some of the things that had gone on in my family. And right at that time frame, somewhere in there between 6 and 8, there was some pretty traumatic things that went on. And I can only conclude that that's where I started. I don't remember that I started eating a lot, But I do remember coming home from school one day and making myself a sandwich of bread and honey. And my mom seeing me, and she was like, Starla, you're eating again? And then yet honey. And I felt so ashamed. And it took me years to enjoy honey after that because I thought that was making me fat. So yeah, I just assume it was, I mean, I know that if there is abusive situations, even though I don't remember that there was abuse so much towards me, but that is very common to put on weight as an emotional comfort. But I don't know if that's, for everybody, or I know that we have an amazing ability to, I don't know if repress memory is the word I would use, but put it aside, and it's for me, it's just been like I've had to work backwards and just kind of piece the puzzle pieces together to make sense out of. And I'm also very aware that our memories can be faulty at times, and piecing together is just kind of a need that I have of mine, but I don't necessarily look at all of them as factual, if you will. It's things that have made sense to me so that I can continue to move forward. Did it or didn't it happen is in some instances immaterial in some ways.
Right. When you were talking, I think I've talked about this before in one of the other podcasts we did, but you were talking about that conceived in fear, and it reminded me of a story. A couple adopted a baby. I'm not sure if the mother even saw the baby after birth. She had the baby. They took possession of it, and they were really frustrated because every day at about 5 o'clock, the baby would become inconsolable, crying. They couldn't find anything wrong, didn't seem to be a stomach ache, whatever. Eventually, they reached out to the mother and they said, "What's going on?" And she said, "My boyfriend came home from work at about 5 every evening and would beat me." And so that baby, even inside, had picked up the cycle of time and the flood of negative emotion and the fear, and was just continuing that cycle even though it was no longer in that, not even in the womb, not in the environment. So
yeah, that's wild. And it reminds me of a lecture that I watched about like the effects of trauma on the brain, right? And I should have looked it up. I was going to share this and I had forgot. I should have looked it up so that I say it correctly. But the eyes, babies and moms make the connection through the eyes, the emotional connection. And so when you hold the baby, if you are as the mother are under so much stress, the one part of your brain that does the emotional connection is shut down. So even though you're looking at your baby and it's like the window into the soul, but it's not there because you're shut down, and the child doesn't get the emotional connection and bonding that they need. And that kind of, I guess, goes along with all of that, right? Like, that was really hard for me to accept because of the depression that I had been going through. I know my children didn't get the emotional connection that they so badly should have had from me.
wow. Yeah.
So I'm gonna let my freak flag fly a little bit here. But when babies are born here in the U.S., anyways, they will put a cream on their eyes, and so it messes up their vision, and they're not actually able to make that contact with their mothers. But it's only for vaginal births, and so I had both of my children via C-section, and I refused that eye cream on both accounts. And I actually argued with the nurses And I just said, I mean, that's for vaginal birth. We're not doing that. We do not need that. We are not doing that. So, because I had heard that connection is made, and that is something very, very important. And so there you go.
Yeah, 100%. It just also, when I think about it, I've had to do a lot of forgiveness of who I was as a mom and how it affected the kids. But I was going to go somewhere with that. Got sidetracked by the need to forgive. Gosh, I don't remember where I was going with that. It's okay.
Okay, well, this is just my opinion, but Waylon, I mean, this is a great first interview. I love everything she's got to say. I think we've gone long enough. Shall we shut it down and stop recording, and we'll stay on and talk a little bit. And possibly we could do a second episode in the future talking about some of those cases.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like to see an episode just targeting sexuality and maybe sexual shame. Not even so much some of the abuse cases, but just I think there's so much to understand about this culture and their shame. But yeah.
I was hoping somebody would come up with that. I would love to do one of those. I think it's so important.
I'd love that. I think that would be amazing. My friend's mom told, I mean, the one thing I guess that she drove home was that masturbation was a sin. Like, of anything, masturbation was a sin. To this day, my friend has got massive guilt around just sexual trauma all the way around. Mm-hmm. And she just always goes back to, we were told never to touch ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, clothing, sex, at the very bottom, the foundation of the needs of humanity.
Well, okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. And want to thank you for being willing to just come on and just share your life. Yeah, I love listening to all of these stories. I really like doing this.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.